Welcome to another episode of the Strategic Edge, your go to podcast for breaking down powerful tools in business strategy. I'm your host, Rim, and today we are diving into one of the most fundamental and misunderstood concepts in strategic management: Porter's Five Forces. Before we dive into the main concept, let's briefly review what the five forces are, developed by Harvard professor Michael Porter. This framework helps us understand the structure of an industry by examining five competitive forces. 1. Threat of new entrants. 2. Bargaining power of suppliers. 3. Bargaining power of buyers. 4. Threat of substitutes. 5. Industrial rivalry. These forces help determine how attractive or challenging an industry is, and ultimately how profitable firms within it can be. So now let's dive into the main concept. Porter's five forces are the characteristics of industry environment that have the greatest impact on the performance of the firm in that industry. The fundamental mistake that students make when analyzing these forces is that they analyze them from the perspective of an individual firm. For example, they might say the bargaining power of suppliers for PepsiCo is low because PepsiCo has many suppliers. This is incorrect. A correct version of this statement was state the bargaining power of suppliers in the non-alcoholic beverage industry is low because blah, blah, blah. Porter's five forces are like the weather. The weather on campus is the same for every person on campus. However, different people make different decisions to deal with the weather. Long sleeves versus short sleeves, carry an umbrella versus wear a raincoat, etc. In similar way, although Porter's five forces are the same for every firm in an industry, different firms make different strategic decisions to equip themselves against those forces. Some firms might source from multiple suppliers to reduce suppliers' power or assign customers to exclusive long-term contract to reduce buyer power. When performing Porter's five forces analysis on behalf of a single firm, each force must first be analyzed from the perspective of the entire industry before any discussion, or analysis of how that firm is equipped to deal with that force. For example, one could say the bargaining power of buyers in the non-alcoholic beverage industry is fairly strong due to purchase volume and backward integration. However, PepsiCo's brand image and loyal customer base mitigate this power somewhat. To perform Porter's five forces analysis, identify the most relevant factors for each force and identify the direction and the magnitude of the impact of those factors. If most of the impact indicate a strong force, identify the force as strong. If most of impact indicate a weak force, identify the force as weak. If the main factors balance each other out, then identify the force as moderate. So to assess the threat of new entrants, you must identify the strength of barriers to entry. If you do not discuss barriers to entry, then you are not properly assessing this threat. If you identify the threat of new entrants as low, but there are several recent clear examples of successful entrants, you are probably doing it incorrectly and need to reassess. Remember that high barriers to entry mean a low threat of new entrants, and vice versa. In Porter's five forces analysis, suppliers are firms that sell inputs to identify to Suppliers are firms that sell inputs to an industry. Suppliers do not sell directly to buyers unless suppliers are forward integrated or buyers are backward integrated. To assess supplier bargaining power, you need to identify the most important suppliers first. Then you can assess question of the relative number of suppliers versus number of firms in the industry. Differentiation among suppliers, forward integration by suppliers or backward integration by industry firms, etc. Importers' five forces analysis. Buyers are direct customers that buy product or service from an industry. Suppliers do not sell directly to buyers unless suppliers are forward integrated or buyers are backward integrated. To assess buyer bargaining power, you need to identify the most important buyers first. The first mistake that most analysts make is only looking at consumers. Consumers are very often not the buyers that should be analyzed. For example, with PepsiCo above, consumers do not buy directly from PepsiCo or any other non-alcoholic beverage manufacturer. So an analysis that looked at buyer bargaining power of consumers in this industry would be extremely flawed. The second biggest mistake made in analyzing this force is overemphasis of switching cost. While switching costs are relevant, the relative number of buyers compared to the number of firms in the industry and the volume of purchase by the average buyer are by far the most important factors in determining buyer bargaining power. Importers' five forces analysis. Substitutes refer to products or service sold by firms outside of the industry that customer could choose instead of products or service sold by the industry. Substitutes for the non-alcoholic beverage industry include tap water or alcoholic beverage. For example, not different options for non-alcoholic beverage you would find at convenience store or supermarket. Importers' five forces analysis rivalry refer to the intensity with which firms have to compete with each other for customers. Most students make the mistake of claiming that every industry has strong rivalry. This is obviously not the case, or it would be pointless to discuss this force at all. The number of competitors and how easy or difficult it is for them to differentiate themselves are the main factor in this force. More differentiation means lower rivalry. The other most important factor is industry growth. If the industry is growing rapidly, this lowers rivalry because the firms in the industry can grow profits without taking market share from competitors. So there you have it. Porter's five forces aren't about what makes your company strong or weak. They are about the landscape, the industry forces that affect every player. Once you understand the landscape, you can start thinking about how your firm should respond. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Strategic Edge. If you found this helpful, be sure to check out our next segment where we break down real-world examples of how companies use these forces in their strategic planning. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious.